Hey everyone, is Into the Lost Lands really a glimpse into the future of filmmaking, or is it just another attempt to make digital environments work on a budget? With Paul W.S. Anderson at the helm of this dark fantasy, adapted loosely from George R.R. Martin's story, this film is a fascinating mix of ambition, limitation, and experimentation. But is it successful? And more importantly, what does it mean for the future of science fiction and fantasy movies, especially in an era of digital filmmaking? Starring Dave Bautista and Milla Jovovich, Into the Lost Lands takes us into this dystopian future where magic, monsters, and human survival really intertwine. But beyond the quest at its core, the film raises some significant questions about how movies are being made today. Virtual sets, AI-driven cinematography, and digital world building are becoming more common. But are they delivering the immersive and emotional experience audiences expect? And is Into the Lost Lands a good movie? That's where this discussion comes in. This isn't just a review, it's an exploration of where Hollywood is heading and what this means for storytelling on the screen. Because I really do think this film is one of those pivotal turning point movies that we need to be watching. So, if you've seen Into the Lost Lands, I really, really want to hear from you. And if you haven't, stick around because this film really represents something bigger than itself. And if these are the kinds of discussions you like, please do be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more, since it will let YouTube know what you want. Thank you so much. All right, so monsters, they roam the wastelands known as the Lost Lands, while the few remaining human survivors live in a fortified city hidden inside a mountain, protected from the horrors outside. Inside the city, we meet Grey Alice, played by Milla Jovovich. Captured by the ruling church, she faces execution because, of course, magic and dark creatures of the world are considered an affront to God. She escapes and is soon approached by the queen, who has an unusual request. She wants to become a shapeshifter. Grey Alice is compelled to grant any request made of her if the price is paid. This sets her on a dangerous journey to track down a shapeshifter and steal its power for the queen. To navigate the treacherous Lost Lands, she hires a skilled hunter named Boyce, played by Dave Bautista, and the adventure begins. At its core, the story is solid. The characters, their needs, and the choices they make all make sense within the world presented. Grey Alice is driven by an internal compulsion to grant requests, but at a cost to the asker, which kind of creates a moral dilemma that adds depth to her journey. And Boyce, the seasoned hunter, has his own motivations for accompanying her to find this changeling, and their dynamic evolves in ways that feel natural to the world that they inhabit. The film really never stops to explain anything. Doesn't explain how everything fell into ruin, but that's fine because it's ancient history at this point, likely long forgotten by the people who remain. While we don't get explicit backstory for any of the characters, really, the setting hints at a world shaped by the remnants of war, collapsed societies, and the rise of supernatural forces that seem born out of past scientific accidents. What matters is the journey, which is laid out in a map with key destinations plotted out that kind of pops up on the screen at different intervals in a very video game-esque style after each major location is reached. The story doesn't dwell on exposition, but instead it throws us directly into its mythic quest structure, which feels like a classic adventure narrative where the unknown dangers of the Lost Lands serve as both a physical and symbolic challenge for Grey Alice and Boyce to overcome. As they travel through the hostile landscapes, Pursued by relentless forces, the film really leans into that dark fantasy Western genre, evoking the feel of a futuristic fairy tale set in a crumbling future world. Where the film struggles, however, is in its execution. The biggest issue is its budget. With only 55 million, it faced an uphill battle in creating an immersive post-apocalyptic fantasy world. A film like this really needs to either commit to a large-scale practical set throughout the film, think like Mad Max Fury Road, or it needs to lean entirely into CGI and virtual environments. With their budget constraints, the filmmakers chose the latter, using LED screens, CGI, and AI-driven cinematography. This approach works in some ways, as it gives the film a comic book aesthetic, as well as kind of that video game feel that really fits the tone of the world and the story that they have chosen to tell here. But it also has its limitations, which we're going to get into. Known for directing Resident Evil, Event Horizon, and other fast-paced action films, Paul W.S. Anderson has a signature style that blends fantasy and science fiction elements that are set in an ashen neo-noir dystopian future that depicts wastelands with a desaturated neo-noir color palette. Into the Lost Lands really follows that same approach, creating a stylized world that feels like a comic book brought to life inside of a video game setting rather than a vibrant, hyper-realistic dystopia like we see in, say, Mad Max or Blade Runner or Alita Battle Angel. This aesthetic choice for Into the Lost Lands makes sense given Anderson's vision, but it also comes with some trade-offs. In some moments, the world building works beautifully, with burnt out sepia tones reinforcing the desolation of this future. However, the CGI environment sometimes lacks the tactile grit and the lighting that practical sets provide, making scenes feel more artificial, no matter how skilled an actor is. There's a tangible difference in performance when placed in a practical set with physical objects that they can act against rather than a green screen or an LED volume wall. It's really different. And the ability to key off the physical world, that natural lighting, the wind, the texture of the ground, it shapes their presence on screen in ways that digital environments struggle to replicate. Using digital assets for a film with extensive world building makes financial sense. Yeah, as constructing physical sets for every location would really push the costs into the hundreds of millions of dollars. And this is where Into the Lost Lands' $55 million budget shows. While CGI allowed Anderson to create a vast world, it came at a cost of realism and depth in both the visual landscape and the actors' engagement with their surroundings. However, smaller budget films like this may find that this is opening doors for other independent filmmakers to bring their passion projects to life, including stories that larger studios might dismiss as too expensive to produce using traditional methods. I really shudder to think what the choice would have meant for films like Dune 2, Lord of the Rings, and even Star Wars, their sequel trilogy, that really capitalized on the use of physical environments and physical sets. While the core story is engaging, there are inconsistencies in the details that really pull you out of the film. The journey Gray Alice and Boyce take to find the shapeshifter is riddled with these odd choices in pacing and logic. For instance, there's a working train. It's the last functioning one in humanity. And so the characters are following the train tracks, but they're being pursued by people who are on the train. And they're constantly getting caught up to by the people on the train. They're on horses, but they shouldn't. It's like the time doesn't make sense. The amount of time it takes to get from one location to the other, and where they get caught and where they get confronted by their pursuers. The timing just constantly kind of rubs up against logic, and that's a real problem. And sometimes Boyce and Gray Alice have horses. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they have one horse. Sometimes they have two horses. And there isn't really an explanation of where the horses came from, where they put the horses, how they got the new horses, where they got the tack from the horses. And it's really little things like this that get caught in your mind when you're watching this. And when you are watching a digital screen behind the actors, you really can afford to have little things like this pull you out because then you notice all the big things too. These are small but noticeable inconsistencies, and they all add up and they really do break the film's immersion. Another challenge is the dialogue. And the characters, they speak in a real, highly formal, almost archaic manner, avoiding contractions. So instead of saying it's, they say it is. This feels deliberate. Possibly it's an attempt to create a distinct culture that is unique to this world. But I gotta tell you, in practice, it sounds stilted and unnatural. Dialogue needs to flow in a way that fits the rhythm of speech. And this choice makes many lines feel overly rigid. This is especially noticeable with Dave Bautista, who shines when he's allowed to deliver dialogue naturally. Here, you can feel him struggling against the constraints of the script, making his performance feel more forced and more stilted than it should be. Dave Bautista as Boyce is a great choice. I actually really enjoyed him in this role. He's physically imposing, he has a strong presence, and he knows how to handle action sequences. But his performance, like those of the rest of the cast, suffer from the unnatural dialogue and the artificial environment. The same goes for Milla Jovovich as Gray Alice. Both actors have great moments in the film, but you can really feel the directorial choice behind their performances. And when that starts coming through more than the acting, you know you have a problem. Everything else is just a little too structured, too deliberate, as if they're trying to match the stylized world around them rather than acting naturally with it. So while this film feels kind of weirdly like a continuation of Resident Evil, especially since we're talking about Gray Alice and hearing that she's been around for years and years and years longer than anyone else, and the character from Resident Evil is Alice. Like, it feels like Paul Anderson was trying to like wedge in some connections to his Resident Evil franchise. So we had this story from George R.R. Martin that he's been trying to adapt for years. And again, it is by George R.R. Martin, who is best known for Game of Thrones. This short story is a dark, futuristic fairy tale presented in a really straightforward narrative that never wavers from its structure. And it reads like a modern, dark fantasy version of Grimm's fairy tale, including an I told you so moral at the core. While the basic structure of Martin's story and the characters are present in Paul Anderson's film, they have been dramatically embellished to better fit the cinematic storytelling. And they've added in lots of elements, lots of new plot points, lots of new things that really almost transform the story into something that's almost unrecognizable. His additions, particularly to the futuristic landscape and the indirect resonance with Alice, again from Resident Evil, really makes this adaptation feel almost like a different story than what Martin wrote. And if it weren't for the character names, you wouldn't necessarily see much crossover. Anderson added the church as Gray Alice's antagonist, a choice that really helps to create conflict and to drive the story forward within the traditional three structure act for a film. His directorial style leans more into action and spectacle rather than the lyrical and delicate fairy tale atmosphere that Martin crafts in his prose. Fans of Martin's writing might find themselves wondering how much of his original tone and thematic depth made it into the final script. While the film retains the characters, key plot points, and eerie mythic atmosphere of the Lost Lands, it doesn't fully capture the intricate beauty and the haunting quality of Martin's original story. Instead, Anderson's version really transforms the tale into something far more cinematic, more bold, more visually striking, and action-packed, but lacking the quiet elegance and nuance found in Martin's storytelling. One of the most interesting aspects of Into the Lost Lands isn't just the story itself, but what it represents in terms of filmmaking. Hollywood is experimenting with low budget sci fi and fantasy films using new technology. That's no secret. Into the Lost Lands is part of this experiment, like Flight Risk, which tested AI driven cinematography on a much smaller scale. Studios really are trying to figure out if they can produce visually ambitious films for a fraction of the cost of films like Dune 2 or Mad Max Fury Road, which blends CGI with real world locations. In comparison, Into the Lost Lands relies almost entirely on digital filmmaking. But does it work? One of the major differences between these mid-budget films and larger scale productions is the reliance on virtual environments over practical sets. Large blockbusters often blend CGI and physical locations using massive constructed sets or even shooting on real landscape in order to create an immersive world. In contrast, this film relies heavily on LED volume technology, where actors perform in front of a high resolution digital backdrop. While this can be effective when done well or done in moderation, it also limits the actor's ability to physically interact with their surroundings. Again, it makes their performances feel more staged and less natural. This shift in production raises important questions. Is good enough actually good enough? Can audiences accept visually stylized worlds that don't feel entirely real as long as the story is compelling? And if that is something they can accept, that actually means the script has to be that much better, that much more polished, and that much more cohesive so that those little details don't pull them out of the film to notice that visual digital landscape. Or they're going to continue to gravitate toward films that use practical traditional effects and real world locations because that feels so much more natural to a viewer in this kind of environment. These digital techniques, they may be cost effective, but they also risk creating a noticeable gap in how actors engage with their environment and how audiences connect with the world on the screen. And it really is creating a sense of two different production levels that the studios are trying to see if they can be acceptable in a theatrical release. One is those really big productions that are multi-million dollar endeavors, and the other are these kind of low budget digital films just to see what will go well, what will make money, and where that trade-off is for profit versus investment. I I don't know. I am a little bit worried about how they're going to navigate this space and the end quality that we're going to end up with in the theater. All right, so that is actually a lot of information to take in for a single movie and a single movie review. And when you get right down to it, the big question that everybody wants to know is In the Lost Lands worth watching? For what it is, given its budget and production approach, it is a decent film. It's got lots of flaws. It really does. But if you go in knowing what to expect, I really think you can appreciate it for what it's trying to do. And you might find that you enjoy it even more. If you're okay with these stylized fantasy worlds and don't mind that artificiality of some of the visuals that you're going to get, yeah, I think it is worth the ticket. More importantly, I personally really do want you to see this film, and I want you to come back here, and I want you to tell me how you felt about the digital elements in this film. For this reason, it's worth seeing so that we can have a conversation about the direction that Hollywood is taking with these kinds of films and the opportunities that it could unlock for more filmmakers at a lower budget. And we really do need to have this conversation now before Hollywood starts making these choices. They need to have our input in that discussion as they're making these choices for future films. And this is why I really want to hear back from you. Please drop a comment below and let me know what you think. Do you think digital effects like the ones into the Lost Lands feature can ever replace traditional filmmaking? What do you think of Into the Last Land as a film? Did the visuals work for you? Did the dialogue bother you? Did you think this kind of filmmaking is kind of the future of movies? Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you enjoyed this review, please do give it a thumbs up and share it and subscribe for more discussions like this. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next review. Bye for now.